the whole point we're here is to hear from our panel, to share our experiences and to have a conversation about how we can make the workplace more inclusive, more equitable. And we are talking about women today, but we don't have to just focus on the gender element. We're going to talk about race as well. Obviously, that was dictated in the event for today. So my name is Zoe Hayden-Jones, the Director of Jobs for Women. I am so excited to bring this panel to you today. We have Em Ledger, Executive Product Manager from the BBC, Emma Wright, Tech Business Analyst, JP Morgan, and Yasmin Donado, Head of Connected Technology Academy at KPMG. So I'm going to pin them all at some point, but you'll definitely be seeing them and hearing from them. And as I said, you can always drop questions. If you've got specific questions for anyone on the panel, you can just pop their name in. So let's get going. To begin with, I just wanted to very quickly just talk to you about what Jobs for Women is. So we are a business to consumer and a business to business organisation. So at the heart of Jobs for Women is our community of women. We've got a podcast, weekly podcast. We have a free careers and wellbeing membership. We've got a jobs board, and we run free monthly masterclasses with global experts, and that's open to women. If you're in the membership, you can join us. Our next one is all about confidence. And then very soon we're launching our networking and mentorship schemes within the free community. What we do with businesses is we have a jobs board for you to advertise jobs roles. We work with companies to be recognised as an organisation that supports women. We've got an endorsement program coming in the future. We've got podcast sponsorship, email marketing, loads of different advertising ways to reach our community of women. And of course, access to this talent pool of women from 16 to 65. We work a lot with colleges and unis, which we're really excited about. And then I just want to explain a little bit, just for about 3 minutes, because I did test how long it took, because I don't want to talk for too long, about my why. Why are we here? Why did I set up Jobs for Women? So I am from Leeds originally. I grew up in Leeds, surrounded by an incredible family, super supportive, amazing parents. My two brothers, they were all right, it was all good. I decided to stay in Leeds, went to uni, studied public relations. I got my first big break for an internship year when I headed off to London. I got a job at Warner Brothers, and I was literally living the dream. I secured the highest paid PR internship. I relocated with my best mate, and I worked super hard that year. It's always been a core value of mine. And I loved being part of the glitz, the glamour, red carpet. Worked a lot of hours, but it was worth it. Headed back after uni to do my final year. And then upon graduating, I got a job at Channel 4, which was another dream job. I was later headhunted by the head of Harry Potter publicity and Daniel Radcliffe's PR, and I worked in her brand new PR agency. And as much as I loved what I did at the time, I always knew I wanted to have a family at some point. So off I went traveling with my now husband, Rich. And when I returned, I was engaged. I was happily planning the wedding, and I literally thought I would slot back in to this world of PR in London. I then went on to get another dream job in a huge international TV and film company. And that's when things for me started to change. I felt uncomfortable in my skin at work. I was part of this small team where my line manager didn't believe or didn't share my belief that you could be a woman, be successful, and be a parent at some point. And I was starting to witness, everything that we see now, and everything that we talk about at Jobs for Women, that women weren't as visible as men at senior management. And I just remember thinking, I can't do this job and have a baby someday. This is impossible. And I always felt conflicted that I'd be throwing away what I'd worked so hard for. My line manager used to frequently say, don't have a baby, get a dog. When we used to be at work drinks, it was very eye-opening. And what I witnessed wasn't just related to me. There was a woman in the organisation who I remember worked so many hours, so hard, great at a job, asked to leave 2 days early to pick up her kids. It was like 15 minutes earlier, and she was met with like disapproving looks, like, no, why would you go and do that? And that's when the self-doubt started to creep in. I began to question putting off the age in which I should have kids. Should I put it off? Should I work longer? I felt like I had to fit into the mold of what the organization wanted me to be. Then it came to a head in 2015. I had a miscarriage. I went through a spell of severe depression. I took time off work. But I did go back. It was mentally and emotionally challenging, but I got back. I worked hard. I got back into this organizational way of working. Finally got pregnant again. And in the summer, went to some work drinks, obviously early stages of pregnancy, and a very awkward moment occurred. A moment that I would not wish on any woman in any work setting or organization. We were met in this glitzy bar with a tray of Pims, and I remember thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to hide that, you know, I can't have alcohol. Again, I think this would change now. This was like 10 years ago or so. And I went off to the bar to ask for a mocktail. And when I got back to the table where my boss was, I sat with my mocktail, and she leant across with her straw, put her straw in my drink, knowing that it was non-alcoholic, took a sip, and we shared a moment, we shared a look where it was her way of telling me that she knew I was pregnant. And I've never felt so small, so insignificant, undervalued, and just rubbish in that moment. Because obviously I wanted to keep it a secret. The pregnancy went well, which is brilliant. Then we relocated back to Leeds, and all of these experiences have always been within me this, you know, can we find the balance? Can we be a mum? Can we be a career? Can we have the successful career? And I'd bought the domain for Jobs for Women years before, and I kept ticking over in my mind. And I kept thinking, I want to help women, and I want organizations to support women, so other people don't experience what I went through, and that women don't have to give up their career if they desire to have a family, or wherever they want to go, or if they want to be leaders. So I got to work creating my vision whilst being a mum. The juggle was real. I worked in a local yoga studio, and my second experience of being pregnant was completely different. So I rewrote the story. I now know that it is possible. And that just helped me with the drive and the vision for Jobs for Women, that we don't have to just say, you know, the old age saying, which really annoys me, can women have it all? Because it's like, no, can we have it all? It's not just about women. So I have never been more passionate about my vision and my mission for Jobs for Women, which is for women to have every career opportunity they deserve, for their well-being to be a priority, that they can have the successful career and a family if they want it. They don't have to. They can command the salary that is in line with what other men and women are being paid. It's not just about men. And have the same leadership opportunities regardless of age, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or parental situation. So that is a whistle-stop tour. I feel like, you know, I often talk about why I started Jobs for Women, but I feel like sharing real life stories helps get the message across. And the more we do events like this and share our stories, the more we can make change at a grassroots level. So on that note, I am going to put it back out to, well, my next slide is our Q&A time. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to pin our panel, and we are going to get chatting. So welcome, Yasmin and Emma. It's incredible to have you all here. So let's jump right in. So if we can start with you. We met, didn't we, at another panel, which was incredible. And I really resonated with all of the stories that you shared at that panel, which we'll hopefully get into. I know you're so passionate about diversity, equality, and inclusion. So do you want to just briefly share any personal experiences or insights relating to gender or race inclusivity or anything, just to kickstart the panel?
Sure. Hello. Thanks for having me. It's also nice to see a bunch of familiar faces on this call. So hello, everyone. Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple of sort of, I don't want to say highlights because they're not exactly celebratory moments, but some things that really stick out for me. So to give a bit of context, I've now been in like digital and tech for around 13 years. I've been in product for 5. And that kind of path to leadership, I think, has had, I guess, lots of opportunities to see where these problems occur in tech. So if you're not familiar with a product manager role, often we kind of are the person that represents the business and also the end user or the customer. So we then will spend a lot of time with tech teams specifically, but then also, you know, kind of commercial leadership, which is a whole interesting thing in itself. So like you really get a mixed bag of people that you work with. And I think for me, just seeing the same things over and over again, female developers constantly being referred to as juniors is totally a thing. For example, people kind of come into a sort of senior leadership team and saying, you know, we're really behind because we've got too many juniors on the team. And we're referring to women who aren't even juniors. They just happen to be female developers. There's constant, you know, misrepresentation of women and this intersectionality as well, which we'll get into, of race and social class. We had a bunch of interns join at one of the previous companies that I was at, and I heard two different people on separate occasions refer to them as underprivileged people who'd been given a chance to get into tech, when actually it just so happened that that segment of people were mostly people of colour and people from working class backgrounds. There was no underprivileged element about it. It was a scheme that anybody could apply to. It was just that people made that assumption. So again, time and time again, these things, being in meetings where people expect you to take the notes as a woman, you know, especially male leadership. Oh, can you just sort all those spreadsheets out? Can you prepare this presentation for me? You know, always being the female members of the team and having to routinely point that out. Yeah, just loads of different sort of microaggressions like that along the way. And also some kind of a little darker elements really with being a woman in these environments, of having people just say the most insensitive things and inappropriate things. To come back to conversations of pregnancy, not my personal experience, but again, being in a room with people and colleagues who are pregnant and male members of staff saying the worst things that you just think, why would you do that? And feeling like, can you speak? Can you not speak? Would that person want me to kind of back them up? Would they not? You know, all these things that I think we carry as women in this industry, and the kind of mental fatigue sometimes, and that hypervigilance that you find yourself having in meetings sometimes, the defensiveness, the protectiveness. I mean, one particular example that I have is actually, no, two. I'll go with two because they're a similar theme. Is when I first actually started in tech, like I said, I'm from a working class background, and I had no idea of the amount of travel that might be involved and having to kind of cover your own expenses, especially when you're new, right? So you can claim things back, but how about the bit where you know, have to pay the amount up front? So some places, you know, will have like work booking systems. But in this particular role, I was still new. I wasn't on the system. And in my first week, I had to go to a conference in Edinburgh. So I had to do 3 nights in a hotel plus train. I just couldn't do it. Didn't have a credit card. Had no access to a credit card. And it just wasn't something that I could do. So I had to speak to my line manager. And when we got to the hotel, as a huge group of us, and everybody's sort of checking in, he shouted across the full group and said, do you want to come over here? I'm going to have to sort your stuff because obviously I've had to cover you. And it was just this weird, awkward thing. Like, why? Why do you feel the need to do that? So that was one. And then another one was, I was staying in a hotel again, such is the lifestyle sometimes, staying in a hotel. And one of my colleagues who I had a really good relationship with, who was a senior developer in my team, was messaging on WhatsApp. We all had a group. There was about 5 or 6 of us, and messaged me directly to say, would I like to go to his room and stay at his room that night? And so obviously for me, very shocked, a lot to deal with there. This was someone I worked really closely with. How would I handle it? So I replied straight away, this is not okay, right? The next morning, he made the entire day so uncomfortable, was refusing to get involved in the presentation that I'd spent hours preparing, was really sort of obstructive, undermining. And then when we got back to the office, I was invited to a sort of a sit-down mediation session that some other people had picked up on our relationship breaking down, which was the quote, and to all get together and discuss what we should do to resolve it. As if, you know, it was like, what am I even doing with this? You know, that same line manager that I had, it was actually in the same role, that kind of did what he did at that hotel, was also the person that I had to go to try and have some sort of support. So I had to confide in him what had happened. And he was like, oh, boys will be boys, you know, just tell him you're not interested, and that type of thing. So in that situation, I had to go to his boss, who happened to be a woman, and she actually joined that mediation session. But yeah, at no point was anyone, right, we might rethink this team, we might move this person off. It was all, how are you going to deal with this? How are you going to make this not uncomfortable for everyone else?
That is, I think everyone is sort of open mouthed. First of all, I'm so sorry that you went through that. Second of all, it makes me sort of worry that, you know, you were in a position to say this is not okay, but there were a lot of, you know, younger women that wouldn't know how to handle that, and it was subsequently handled very badly and then went into mediation. That's, yeah, and this is why we are having these conversations. And when we work with the colleges and universities, it's like, when I think back to my early career, I was a bit of, I said it on my podcast, I was a yes woman. I was like, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll work late and do that. And it's kind of like, I'm so passionate about empowering the next generation and us and every age to use their voice. So I'm proud that you were able to say, hell no. I thought it was interesting as well what you said about that, you know, being on edge, and like this idea that almost like expecting, you know, like in a meeting space, or like being expected to like take the notes. This keeps coming up time and time again, and the assumption on being junior. Emma or Yasmin, have you got anything to share on that?
Yeah, I think just sort of going back to what you said. So again, I've come from single parent background, working class, first generation university student. So a lot of what I do with my role is kind of focused on schools and early talent and grassroots talent, and making sure that we're creating opportunities for people to come into the digital space and showcasing that. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that later. But I think one of the things that keeps cropping up time and time again is not just about how junior women feel about escalating these conversations. It's about how women who are potentially at our level feeling comfortable to escalate those conversations. I've spoken to so many women in, you know, in my industry, in different industries, who, if they've had a situation, they don't feel comfortable escalating because they don't think they're going to be heard. So they're like, oh, well, what's the point? And it goes back to that boys will be boys comment. And I think it's derived from, as we've grown up, if you're a strong little girl, you get called bossy, but if it was a little boy, it'd be classed as leadership skills. And that's kind of been ingrained in us, hasn't it, from since we were very, very young. Like, I've always been called bossy, and equally I don't mind being bossy because I am bossy, right? But there's that kind of barrier and perception piece, and I think we're having to relearn a lot of stuff and re-educate ourselves in terms of like what's okay. And going back to what you were saying, when you were younger, I was very much I'll work all the hours, yes, I'll do this, yes, I do that. And I feel like as I've kind of grown in my career, I've had to take a bit of a step back and go, actually, I need to get comfortable with saying no. I've been in a meeting or in a couple of meetings before where there's been all women in there, and a man has come in and spoke over everybody, and everybody's been sat there and no one has challenged him. And I've been like, what on earth is going on? And I did, because I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and sit by and let somebody speak like that in a meeting, especially somebody who's senior. I've had somebody in a meeting go like this to me in terms of like, stop talking. And I'm not the kind of person to say that. And I'm not joking. I sat there open mouthed and I escalated it at the time to my line manager. And I think it's about feeling like we've got that support in these conversations and feeling comfortable enough in your own skin to be able to do that. But like I said, I think we're having to relearn a lot of stuff as women because of things that have been ingrained in us by society.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say as well is because when we're talking about these experiences, what I'm keen to do is find, there's never going to be a magic wand solution, but what can companies do like that situation? It's knowing as an employee that that you're in a safe space of work, that you're valued, and that there's a process to go through. And like with your example, it's kind of like the process was the guy that sent the inappropriate message to go to the hotel room, and he was your line manager. So what do we think organizations need to be doing when people are experiencing being spoken over or made to, or in M's case, attention that they don't want, or whatever it is? What can organizations do?
I think having really strong male advocates in the business, not even just strong male advocates, but I think that helps. I have to say I've been incredibly lucky with managers that I've had who are male. If anything, I think what we need to really focus on is if you have a female boss, because I think that's where sometimes a lot of the problems can come in, and I don't think we talk about that enough, how it is.
Why, just to interrupt you, why do you think that is? Why
I think, and I'm obviously not like this, but I think we, again, in terms of that whole learning process as we've grown, I think in business and as a woman, sometimes as we've kind of moved through the times, you have to be seen as a bit of a ball breaker to get to the top. That's not always right. I think you can obviously have any personality, but let's be honest about it. The women who tend to be at the top are probably perceived to be as aggressive or over emotional or quite, I don't know, scary. So when you work for a woman, it's always that we've been bred for that element of competition, right? Because there's not as many of us at that level. So that can cause problems in terms of, well, what we should be doing obviously is lifting each other up, not kind of trying to I mentor, right? And I think it's really important to mentor and to have a mentor and to find that common ground, because due to my background, I want to make sure I'm creating that space for other people, because I have a lot of women around me who have done the same for me. And I think it's making sure you have that support, but also being aware of what's like happening around you as well. And I think there is something to be said about women in leadership roles as well and how they treat other women.
I loved what you said as well about that person putting their hand up. It's like having that allyship. And we did a webinar a while ago, and a lawyer, shared her experience of like someone using derogatory language in a meeting, and in a meeting, a board meeting of like 30 people, thinking, I don't really want to do this, but she called it out in that moment. And it's kind of like, that's the approach we need.
You have to. And I've got a friend who is also a lawyer and has told me something very similar, funnily enough. And I think it's about having people that will back you up in any situation and not being afraid of actually calling things out. And I do call things out, but I think sometimes in the moment you can be so shocked and you think that you will know what to do in that situation, but actually because you feel so shocked that this is actually still happening and we're still having to have these conversations. But I think it's feeling comfortable and confident enough to go to whoever it is. So in that situation I did speak to my manager and let them know, and had conversations with other people around it. It's like you feel like you have to sense check yourself sometimes, even though you shouldn't have to, because it's wrong, but I think you always feel like you have to. And until you've got that reassurance, I think it's just making sure that you do have allies in the room, or on the flip side, you are the ally for those people and not being afraid to speak up, because what's wrong is wrong, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's like when the work we do with in colleges and unis and eventually schools, we did a focus group, and one of the young women who were very articulate, very bright, they were all using their voice in the focus group, but we talked about like misogyny or experiences that you're not comfortable with at work. And she put her hand up and she was like, I wouldn't know how to deal with that, and I would probably shut down. And it just fuels my passion, because this is why I'm building the community, because it's like letting maybe the younger women know that it's okay to use your voice and stand up. Yeah, some great points there. I want to jump into intersectionality in the D&I space. And I did a post actually on LinkedIn yesterday about it being the relationship between social categories, race, gender, disability, sexual orientation. We've already talked about, like, with M's example, you know, at class level. I know for me, when I got that job, my big break in London, and I walked into the office at Warner Brothers and they were like, oh, hey up, here she is. And I had it for the whole year, this thing about the accent. And I love now that, you know, we're seeing more accents coming through, like different accents on Radio 1 and everything like that. So looking at intersectionality, there's so much more. And Emma, I want to bring you in on this. Have you had any experiences, you know, in not necessarily where you're working now, or, you know, experiences of race, gender? Can you share any stories with us?
Yeah, sure. So now I'm a VP at JP Morgan, and I've been working in tech for nearly 15 years. But really, it was the experiences I had at the start that were very formative. So born in London, lived here forever, but I'm ethnically Chinese and I'm on the autism spectrum. And I just remember it causing a lot of issues. So one huge example for me was my first job in an investment bank. 2 women, like me, one other, everyone else was a man. And I came into the office one day and one of the devs on the trade floor, you know, his morning salutation to me was, "Good morning, my slanty-eyed whore." And I just remember the, like, crushing silence of all the keyboards stopping, everyone kind of looking up, but no one said anything. And I was 21, fresh from uni, so I was like, oh my God. And I didn't say anything. And then everyone just started going on their keyboard again, you know? And so that was very difficult. And when I did tell it to a manager, again, similar to M's experience, the response is terrible. Like, insofar as I was brought into a room with that man, and they said to me, as a 21-year-old fresh out of school, "Do you want this to go to HR? Because if it does, like, he will be fired, and he has 4 children." And so all the onus was put on me. I didn't know HR existed. I didn't know that employee-led networks existed. I didn't even know HR as a concept. So really, it was very isolating because I had no one to talk to about it. I was too embarrassed to tell my friends, and I didn't know any other women in the office. And because when I raised that issue and I had such a response, after that, when all the behaviors got much, much worse, I definitely didn't raise anything else after that. And so I think, to take it back to, like, a few original questions, you know, why is there the need and what can we do? I think that one example illustrates several things. I think, one, all of these companies should be pushing networks, all of them, because I internalized all of this. I went around for nearly 10 years thinking, oh boy, all of this is my fault. What have I done to invite this? Like, what? And it was only when I joined Women in Tech and I told everyone, and everyone around the table was like, what the? And I was like, aha, so this is not normal and it's not acceptable. So it showed really the value of having those networks and those communities like you're building here. Another one it shows is leadership. It has to be top down. They have to be invested in it. We have to be cutting out these middle managers who are just trying to squash everything, push it under the rug. And I think the other thing is, as well, as everyone else has alluded to, like, when you cannot find your own voice, you need those other people who will step in and be like, whoa, like, that's not okay, whether it be when it happens. And sometimes it can't because everything's too fraught and you need to just de-escalate the situation. And I think for me, what would even have been helpful is someone afterwards coming up to me saying, yo, are you okay? Because that was terrible. But there was none of that. So there's so many different prongs that I feel like nowadays in tech, it's very different. And in the institution I'm in now, again, like, we have all of these multifaceted approaches, but there was none of it back then. And the companies I've been in on this journey, like, it's so different. Some have these, some don't. It's just, you know, but there's a lot of different things that we we could be doing to help people of all ages and all ranks.
I think collective, there was a collective gasp on the call then with that example. That's horrifying. If you had your time to come again, or if that happened now, you know, obviously you internalized it, which I'm so sorry. And when you said about, you know, someone just going, "Are you okay?" and calling out the behavior, that was not okay. "Are you okay?" is like, it's awful. How would you respond to that comment now, 15 years on?
Is, exactly. Now I'm 36 and I feel like, oh, I could handle it so differently. And now, given a do-over, I would escalate. But I mean, something happened to me recently where someone was on a call. We were all in this group call. I joined a new team. Someone was rustling something, and the product owner said, "Who's making that rustling sound? Emma, is it you playing with origami again?" And I was like, oh, come on. And it just felt not big enough to like kick up a fuss over in front of this whole new team. But it just goes to show that even as a 36-year-old woman who's been through this time and time again, sometimes you can't get the words out.
Agree. And I think one of the things I've literally, because of all these conversations, I've just remembered things that have popped into my head, and I'm like, oh, I don't think I can think of anything. And I'm like, oh my God, yes, I can. I'd started a new job a couple of years ago, and I was the only person, well, not only person in the office, but it was kind of like a co-working space. And there was a guy, and he was a bit like inappropriate. I'm quite bolshy, so I'm a bit like, yeah, great, you know, I'd be nice, but again, and just in terms of what one of the guests said, I started like getting inappropriate messages on LinkedIn, and I was just thinking, this is so weird, like inviting me for drinks, saying stuff that he shouldn't be saying. I just absolutely lost it one night, and I just said, you know, I know you've got kids. Do you speak to all women like this? This is totally inappropriate. Don't ever speak to me again in the office. And then I felt bad about it because I felt, I don't know, I felt like I'd overreacted, but I know that I didn't. And obviously he stayed away from me after that, but it's not the point. Like if I was younger and a bit more vulnerable and didn't sort of, you know, I mean, at first I'll admit I didn't really know how to approach it. I just kind of ignored it, and you know, but then I did really like lose my temper, and I was just like, this is really inappropriate. You can't be messaging me like this, like you've got wife and kids, this is like inappropriate. And I think it's having the confidence to be able to say something, but we shouldn't even be put in positions like that just because we're a woman, and just because we, you know, it feels easy to not attack us, but it's easy to do that. And he avoided me ever since, and too right as well. But it's not the point, is it? We shouldn't even have to have those conversations.
No, but it's still
being brought up, really. And you know, in reference to the chat, it's like, you know, women are very sexualized, and you know, there's the internet, and you think of, I don't even want to start on the vein of Andrew Tate, but it's like, how do people not think that is a problem? This is why nothing, and I think we have to admit that nothing's changed, and this, if anything, I feel like it's getting worse.
Why do you think it's getting worse?
The internet, I think, has probably a lot to do with it. Social media. I think kids have access to things that maybe we didn't have access to as we were younger. There seems to be no innocence or no respect, or even teaching people what boundaries are, and you know, how women speak to each other on the internet, how people troll people. It's like, I thought we were supposed to support each other. The fear of, you know, putting yourself out there, you can't do that because everything is so unsafe. And like, you think of all these kids who, you know, are getting bullied online, and you know, it's just, it's out of control, isn't it, really? And I think it all kind of then, it sort of internalizes and it builds, and you're then dealing with a much bigger problem, and it feeds into business and the workplace. Like, and there's probably something to do with like a generational thing as well, but that shouldn't be an excuse, because if you're in a business, you have to move with the times, you have to change, and you have to embrace change. that is probably where a lot of the problem is, in terms of, right, actually we have to consider, you know, diversity of thought, and bringing new people in creates new ideas, and some people just don't like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I started Jobs for Women and I would speak at events, every now and again a man would come up to me and say, well, what about the men? And I always try to tweak what I was saying, because this is not about excluding men. And when I run events like this, I want men to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, they should be here. They need to be listening and learning. And I think this is part of the problem. They don't think that, and I'm speaking very generalistically, and I shouldn't be, because I've got some wonderful men in my life, including my husband, and I'm not just saying that because he can probably hear me, but he's very much, he will come to every talk I do. He will be there, like, he gets it. But also I think we've got a responsibility to educate our sons, our nephews, our godchildren in terms of what is right and what is not. And I think there's this whole thing about, well, it's not all men, but actually if you look at the stats in terms of, you know, domestic violence or whatever it is, it kind of is, though. It is.
Yeah, that's why we all need to be...
lie. And I think the problem with you saying, oh, well, it's not all men, or the fact that you're not calling people out, the men need to be calling people out in certain situations. You know, what would you do if somebody said this? You'd have to say, well, I think there's a problem in terms of men feeling comfortable with what they should call out, because it's been bred in society that you can speak to women in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then thinking about intersectionality, I mean, we might not have examples of like gender pay gap, which is a huge subject. That's a webinar all of its own. But we know that there are significant differences in the hourly pay of different ethnic minority groups. And when you get the microscope out and look, gender, it's magnified, isn't it? Has anyone experienced anything relating to pay gap? Have you ever asked what other people earn, or anyone got any stories to share? Don't worry if not. No. I know that when we did a webinar, what came collectively as our group was that it's okay to ask. And again, going back to my London days, I remember when I went for an interview, it was, you know, like in their head, it was like a lateral move. But to me, it was like a step up, and I wanted more money. And I remember sitting there and them asking my salary, and I told them what salary I was on. And then they said, okay, well, we'll just give you the same. And I remember thinking, I want more. And I just didn't say it. And again, if I had my time to come again, and what we're doing in the community is, it's like, know what you're worth, do your research, have your reasons, but also ask, what is that guy, that woman, you know, it's not just about the men, it's like, what are they earning? And that's how we can combat, you know, if the pay, as we know from the data, there was a PwC report that women earn less, obviously we know, but then when it comes into race, it becomes a whole different, I mean, it's so sad, isn't it? If you feel like you're talking about the same thing over and over, but again, like I keep saying, we need to have the conversations.
Yeah. And I think isn't there some data around the fact that we work for free for 3 months of the year?
It's from November.
Pay is, and I think I've always asked for what I want or what I feel like I deserve, because I think that's important. But you know, that there've been times in my earlier career when I know I was severely underpaid and I was doing a lot of work, and I think we've been, you know, we feel like we have to justify ourselves all the time. Well, why are we asking for more? Why do we feel we want more? I think there's a LinkedIn study as well that says that women will only go for a job if they meet 60% of the requirements on the job description, but actually men, if men won't, no, it might be the other way around. They will only go
90%.
Yes, 90% of women will go for a job, or if they meet 99% of the criteria, but men will, it's like around 60% or something. So it's like we're ruling ourselves out because we think that we can't do it. But equally, there's been jobs that I haven't been considered for that I've matched all of the requirements. So it's like, how do you balance it out?
Yeah, the recruitment process is interesting. And Em, I'm going to jump over to you, because I remember when we met, you had some great ideas about, you know, I think tech companies can they're missing out on great talent if they don't make the recruitment process easier. Can you share any experiences that you've had when applying for jobs?
Yes, I also had another point as well linked to that. So yeah, the first bit being, to come back to that kind of LinkedIn study, is why we make job adverts and job applications so plentiful and oh wow, like look at all these great benefits and stuff that we have, but they're not really thinking about the human at the other end that might be the best fit for the company. If you want to stop high turnover, if you want to make sure that the person that you're recruiting is the best for that role, speak to them on a human level, tell them exactly what it is you're after. Don't say things like, we would like 17 degrees ideally. Don't say it. Like, what is the minimum? Open it up to as many people as possible. Let them come to you and open a conversation up. I think a massive flaw that we have in our industry is putting giant walls up. A big thing, for example, like especially in the earlier days of tech, was a degree. You had to have a degree for any role. So many companies didn't even question it. They just put it on there. You need a degree. Why? There's great apprenticeship schemes. There's huge like internships. There's all kinds of stuff. There's people getting into tech later in life, like who may not even have any GCSEs, like that have come round and put loads of extra work in and are a great asset to a company who don't even get a look in. So that's something I feel very passionate about. The other thing that I was going to say as well about when people are underpaid chronically, awful problems, gender pay gap, etc., everything, but also, and Emma and I have actually spoke about this before, is the amount of work that women typically do on the job that is also not covered. So think about, coming back to them secretarial style roles. Oh, can you organize a social for us, please? Can you plan an away day? Can you, teach us all how to be better allies? Like, sure, where's my compensation for that, right? The amount of extra hours and things that we put in, typically women, as opposed to male colleagues, is another thing to call out as well, because you could be sat with people on the exact same kind of job band as you. You could be right at that bottom of the job band and you're doing all the extra work that they're not doing to make the team a better place. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Why are we doing it then, do you think?
I think it's because again, it's hard to generalize, right? I'm not trying to be in the sort of male, female, like there's all genders, there's everything going on in the mix. I don't think it's as binary as that. But I think when you feel it's the right thing to do, often you will do it, right? We hear lots of things with people saying, oh, culture, like if we address culture's in my experiences in leadership, it's almost like, oh, culture. Okay, if you want to do something about that, you go ahead and do that thing in your own time or do it for the team. But what I really want the staff to be doing is to hit the targets, right? So it's almost this extra thing. It's not seen in the same way. So there's that. But then also, as Yasmin mentioned, similar, I am a mentor. I spend a lot of time doing lots of different community project work, lots of mentoring, because it's important to me to look at that pipeline, to let people know that they can see themselves in this industry. Tech completely changed the trajectory of my whole life, right? I grew up in a house where my dad couldn't read or write. He left school at 13. There was nobody to help me with homework. I failed a bunch of my GCSEs. I didn't see myself being in leadership in tech. It's crazy. I bought a house. What? You can buy a house? That's crazy, right? So I want people to know that that can be their life. And there's one of the networks that I've actually just trained to kind of do the next cohort with of mentoring is the Girls Network. And their motto is, you can't be what you can't see. And that's so important, right? And I feel like even if nobody's paying me extra, I want to do that. I want to make things better for people. I want to help people. To Yasmin's point as well, I want to lift people up. So that's the conflicting thing sometimes.
Yeah, some great points there. And it's interesting, isn't it, how when you can't see it. It's like, for me, when I was in my early stages in London, I was like, oh, okay, all men at the top. Okay, well, how am I going to fit into this? And I just couldn't see it. I just want to jump back one stage, Emma, when we were talking about your experiences. What I don't think I managed to get out, which I really want to ask, is those awful situations that you experienced, how can companies stop that happening? I know there isn't just a one answer, but how are we going to stop people having these experiences in the workplace?
I've seen companies try a lot of different things. And so, like, one of the big ones for me is like eliminating tokenism, because that does my head in, right? They're like, oh, we brought you into this team and then I'm the only woman, or I'm the only not white person, and it's so isolating, and you just feel a bit more confident when there's a bit more of you on the team. And so again, to that end, with regards to the recruitment process, for example, we will not start interviewing people until we've got good male and female candidates. Like, we just will not start. And if we use recruiters, we tell them, go and find more CVs, and they'll always say, no, we can't find more. And we're like, well, this will not start until you do find more. And you know, where I am now is incredibly diverse. Like, I've never been somewhere where there's like East Asian MDs. Again, like, it's difficult being one of these like underrepresented groups, because you have to just put up with like a lot of stereotypes. So, you know, women, emotional or bossy, and East Asian, it's like, oh, you're a good worker, but not a good leader. And it just completely smashes all of that when we have MDs with ADHD, or who are bipolar, or who are also autistic. And it just encourages you to speak up. And I think, again, it encourages you when you're working in tech teams. Like, for example, if you're working agile, there's just ways to promote a really good culture. Like, maybe you have a retrospective when everyone can start piling in on what like didn't work so well. No one takes it offensively, like egos at the door, but you also learn so much more about your colleagues, and then you feel like you want to stand up for them. And again, some of these examples about, you know, Emma, will you take the minutes? And I'm like, no, because it's not my meeting. But then I see them walking over to another woman, and I'm like, no, don't ask her either. But one of the great things our male allies do is they step in without being asked, and they're like, we'll do the minutes. It's like, it's fine. So just a lot of different things, bottom up, top down, recruitment. Yeah.
And when you say the male allies, have they almost is that just unofficial, or have they identified themselves as that? Is that talked about?
Interesting. In the company I'm at, no. It's almost like in this tech division, the women almost outnumber the men in our team. It's pretty crazy. But in other divisions, we have like a lot of men turning up to meetings and just shutting up because they know they need to listen. And then they'll like ask questions or do something after. So, I mean, we see them at those meetings. We see them standing up for people. And whether they say it or not, they're really acting like an ally.
That is awesome.
I feel like I'm one of those like bobbing dogs. I've just been going, yes. Like, this is what we need. Like, all that people need to do is listen. That's all it is. If you want to have it, if you want to strip it back to as simple as that, what do companies need to do? They need to listen, they need to hear, they need to see. It's like we've, you know, luckily for, you know, most of us, we've got the basics to be able to do those things. Listen to what your people are saying, hear what your people are saying, then take action, like include the right people if you don't understand, ask questions if you don't understand, but do it in a mindful way. Like, and I feel like we do a lot of really great stuff to make sure that we, I guess, are thinking of all of these different facets. We have a Black Heritage Talent Programme. We've got a Women in Tech programme that if people come in, if they do well, we convert them to next year's graduate programme. We've run an initiative called IT's Her Future, which kind of brings together all of the women in the firm and has an internal mentoring scheme. But also we do something called IT's Her Future Juniors, where we bring a 15-year-old girls in from, like, you know, less socially mobile schools, so they can come in and learn what it's like to work here and hear from real people. And I've just started something in the last year called Kids Code, So I'm running it on Saturday, and we've got 55 children coming up, and it's a lot. But I kicked it off last Leeds Digital Festival because I'm also a school governor, and like I said, I'm really kind of passionate about ensuring that people have access to education, and we're sort of educating parents as well, because that's again where it all starts. If you don't have a parent that works in this industry, how are you going to explain to your children what the roles are going to be like in 10 years, like particularly with AI coming in and everything? So everything's going to change, right, again. So we have to be prepared for that. And it's like, if we're not willing to do something about it, how can we start, like, how can we complain that there's no pipeline if we're not willing to do something about it? So we run this session for children of like 8 years and above, and it can be anything through to 14, and they literally come and learn for a couple of hours on like computers. They learn how to build a cake out of Python, and so it makes tech fun, and the parents really enjoy it. But it goes back to making sure that you're breaking down those barriers for people so that they can come in and say, oh, I get that now, like I really get it. And it's kind of for the parents and the kids as well. But that's why I think, Elizabeth, definitely this is it. I'm really passionate about making sure we can change the curriculum, but it's not kind of an easy thing. We had a girl come in who was 15, and she said, I'm the only girl on my IT course, like I love it, but I'm the only girl. And even at secondary, if not everybody takes, if no one kind of opts for IT, which we should just not call it because it probably puts people off, then they drop it. So it's like, where's the pathway in? Like, what can we do? And that's kind of why I really kind of drive all this stuff, because I'm not saying everybody has to go into tech, but every role is digital. There needs to be some element of digital literacy and digital fluency, because if not, like that's our whole future workforce, right?
I feel like there's so like it's that power is knowledge thing. And I remember Em and I spoke about this on the podcast. It's like knowing what is out there. So for me, my careers team at school were not very good. And it's kind of like, then it was just that was it. It's like, what do you like at English? And I didn't know like this world of opportunity. And now it's tenfold since I was at school. So it's like all of these experiences that you are all sharing today. It's like, how can we get that out to the masses, to the younger women, to the different ethnic minority groups, to whoever it is, whatever gender? The scope and the possibilities are endless. Like all that work you're doing, the outreach with schools and unis, Yasmin, is amazing. What are we all doing? So we're all on this panel. We're all passionate about this. What do you do in your job to change the marker, to push to change, what's happening in the D&I landscape? I'll put it out to the floor. Anyone? Any takers?
I think for me, it's always been about kind of doing that stuff, focusing on grassroots. And I'm a school governor in my spare time. I always say I have spare time. I have no spare time. That is a lie. My husband's like, if you take on one more thing, we're going to have words. So I'm a school governor, and I'm responsible for Pupil Premium, which is kind of free school meals. And I like to see how it correlates in terms of the data, in terms of behaviours, and making sure that they're being looked after and they've got access. I'm also a board member at Wild. I don't know if any of you have heard of Wild. So again, like a social inclusion initiative, kind of giving opportunities for people's in tech and showcasing things like that. So I do, and I try to speak at as many events as possible and give as much time as possible, and also supporting younger women internally and giving them that sounding board, because I've also got a mentee, two mentees. They've both got promotions in the last year. Like they're both absolutely flying, and for me that's really what makes the difference. It's not about how far I can get, it's about how far I can get other people to go and to push themselves.
Yeah, and I've noticed as well when I speak to sort of more senior women that are flying through their career, they're so keen to give back, and I just love it, because it's like we lifting each other up, dropping the ladder down. Emma, what are you doing in your organisation?
Well, I normally try and rotate around the different networks as well. So when I was very young, it was Women in Tech. the company before this one, it was the race one, and at my current organization, I'm trying to find out more about disabilities, visible and otherwise. And it's just been a different thing in each of the institutions I've worked at. I've just been lucky that you join one and they let you push it as far as you want or need to. So in the first one, it was very basic. We had to like persuade the higher ups that there was a problem. So we launched the first bank-wide gender diversity survey, and the stuff that fell out of that just purely showed them it was not up for debate. There were issues everywhere. So, you know, it really ranges from even that basic stuff that I really feel like we should not have to still be doing, trying to persuade people that there is a problem, to then other networks, speaking a lot, setting new initiatives inside the bank that people have to follow. So there are processes and that people know about them, like that huge range. But for me, I really do like trying different networks, because like you just don't know what you don't know sometimes. And so sometimes you really just have to go and meet people that don't look like you, don't think like you, and realize that also you are sometimes part of the problem and also have a lot of learning and listening to do.
Oh, I love that. That's like the best soundbite ever. I've just recorded a podcast with my friend who is disabled, and it was eye-opening for me, and I want to really explore that. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I know you're doing mentorship and stuff. What have you got going on?
Yeah, so similar things. I am a frequenter of several groups. I like to always be learning and seeing if I can actually help in any way. I think for me, it's about having like really human conversations. So sometimes a lot of it can be very like policies and we need to do this thing. And the thing that I always try and do is just be, who are you trying to talk to, right? What is it we actually want here? We've got that awkward thing of sometimes the groups are very much controlled by the organization and may not realize the depths of where they need to go. So I think there's something there. I very much like to get involved in those difficult conversations sometimes. And also, again, like we've all said, kind of calling out where we need to call things out. I think that's the biggie. So the stuff that I mentioned before about having the same people organizing socials, the same people taking notes, you know, people who get involved in these networks on the team, everybody on that team looks to them to then, do you want to just prepare a thing on this particular issue? And it's like, no. So yeah, I think that's really important, using your voice in the best way to acknowledge the fact that an organization is an organization. It's not a human being. It's the human beings inside it that need to make that change.
Exactly.
And you know, the point that you made, Zoe, as well, really early on, is those like middle managers sometimes that squash stuff. What can we do about that? That's the problem we all face. 360 feedback, where's that? That's the big one.
Yeah, and Steph in the comments said, relating to an earlier point about the presumption around people being underprivileged purely based on their identity, I've been asked to collect and submit data for a sustainability tool which reports on the number of vulnerable people in the business, which is essentially anyone who isn't white, straight, neurotypical, male and without disability. I don't agree with this and have mentioned that it doesn't sit well as I don't feel vulnerable. Have we got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, initial outrage, I think. Hi, Steph, by the way. So is this saying that if I was considered in this report, am I vulnerable because I'm a woman? Like, that is not building the right narrative for us. Immediately it's building the wrong narrative. Steph, I think you've done the right thing by saying that you're not comfortable. I wouldn't be comfortable with that, and kind of it's putting us, and I think there you're putting people in boxes that they don't need to be put in. You can't just assume that because somebody's from a minority background or, you know, a more socially mobile background that it means that they're vulnerable. Like, that's just not necessarily true. And I think, again, it's breaking down those stereotypes and challenging back. You know, how do you know that, you know, a white cis male hasn't come from a vulnerable background? Just because someone's disabled, that doesn't mean you can class them as vulnerable. Like, that's just not right at all. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but that's my stance.
Yeah, and I think it's great that it's that pushback, isn't it? When something doesn't sit right, it's like back to the use your voice. We have to wrap up. We've gone 3 minutes over. I mean, we could keep talking. We could make a cuppa, couldn't we, and just sit here all day and put the world to rights. I am so honoured that you've given your time. I'm speaking to the panel. I'm speaking to all of you as well, but I think it was so insightful. Some shocking moments, heartbreaking moments, but a lot of positivity in terms of what we're going to do to be the change. So thank you so much to the panel. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm putting a link in. Join the Free Women's community. It's free. We're building our group, so we're going to have women in tech, we're going to have menopause, we're going to have everything in there. And that's where, if you want to be a mentor at Jobs for Women, you can give some time. It's growing, it's exciting, and I want you to be part of it, because we need to be the voice of change, don't we? So if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll send the recording out, and yeah, any other info that you might need. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.